leg shaving, gear ratios, maximal heart rate calculations, and riding to the local shops in Lycra. It's all coming up on this week's Ask GC Anything.
It certainly is, but the first question is in relation to indoor training, a pertinent subject at this time of the year, of course, and it comes from Steve Lee, who asks, is a mile or a kilometre on the turbo worth the same as a mile or kilometre on the road? What a cracker to start with.
Yeah, difficult question to answer actually. It's going to be nigh on impossible to give you an exact correlation between the two. A lot of it's going to depend on the resistance setting on your train and also how you're measuring the speed. So if you've got a resistance set high and you're effectively trying to climb indoors, you're obviously going to do far less kilometres than you would do out on the open road on the flat. Or maybe if you're on rollers with very little resistance, you might do a lot more.
Yeah, so what we'd recommend really is to ignore the actual distance and focus on duration and intensity. So basically your perceived effort, you can measure that by using a power meter or a heart rate monitor. But one thing is definitely for sure, and I can testify to this having spent years on the turbo, is that for every minute you spend on the turbo, it's of a far higher quality than that on the road because there aren't the same amount of interruptions and you don't really freewheel at all, do you?
No, there's nowhere to hide and no reason to freewheel, as you mentioned. Actually coming up right now is our GCN guide to indoor training, which you might find quite useful.
Firstly, you're going to need to find yourself somewhere nice and flat to put your turbo trainer, and secondly, somewhere that you don't mind getting wet, because you are going to sweat a lot. Now, the irony is of protecting yourself from the weather outside and training indoors is that you're going to need to find somewhere nice and cold, because if you overheat, it's going to put a ceiling on your training, because basically you'll have heart rate drift without actually putting in any extra effort.
Next up, we have a question in from Toby Ryan. He asks, Lycra for commuting to work or popping to the shops, yay or nay?
Well, shall we start with popping to the shops?
I think we should, yeah.
I think it's a nay. I mean, cycling has got more and more popular all over the world, but there's no doubt about it. If you start cruising around a supermarket dressed in Lycra, you're going to definitely get a few funny stares, as you did.
I
quite
did,
recently,
yeah.
actually,
I wouldn't
Dan, didn't you?
recommend it.
No.
The commuting side, though, is a completely different matter altogether, and it's somewhat going to depend on how long your commute is. So what we would say is if it's 10 minutes or less, it's probably not worth the hassle of donning all of your Lycra just to go into work and back. On the other hand, if it's much longer, 20 minutes and above, you're going to find it a lot more comfortable and probably faster if you do put some Lycra on. And actually, this gives us a chance to throw to one of our favourite ever GCN videos, where Matt, Lasty, Si and myself did a commuter challenge, taking various forms of transport from a cafe to our office.
I never noticed that before. I've got the
Oh,
yellow
look at the
icon.
chinos.
Dan Lloyd, the Chino years.
It also seems that we can't agree on the best route. Matt and Tom are taking the quiet route. I want to get back as soon as possible, so I'm going the direct route. And Dan? Well, no one quite knows what Dan's up to. It seems like we might have a race on our hands.
Quick fire round now. We'll start off with Bobby, who says, ask GCN, what shoes should I use for cyclocross? Well, that's a fairly easy question. Mountain bike shoes in general. You'll normally use mountain bike pedals for cyclocross because of their clearance abilities in terms of mud. So you want to be able to use mountain bike cleats. So get some mountain bike shoes, preferably with the option for studs at the front in case you need to run up some steep muddy climbs.
Well, next up we have this from Bagamp. How much do you need to train in a week to be in good form? That is a really good question, but it purely depends on your own personal circumstances and ambitions. So if you purely want to keep fit, you could get away with kind of 2-3 hours a week. If you want to do some sportive, for example, you might want to move it up to around 5 or 6 hours a week. But if you want to race and ultimately turn professional, professionals are up between 15 and 30 hours a week. It purely depends on the amount of riding that you want to do, really.
Yeah, Matt actually won the national championships off the back of 12 hours a week training. Very high intensity though, I understand. Next up from JW Van Keulenberg. Hi guys, I deflate my tyres between weekend rides. Will this keep my tyres in better shape or not? I personally completely leave my tyres between rides. I don't think about deflating them at all. I don't entirely know the answer, but I would imagine that if you completely deflate them and you have the weight of the bike on them, it's not going to be great for your tyres. Maybe some of our viewers can help us out with that answer.
I'm in agreement with Dan on that one. Next up we have this from Emre Alka, who asks, I'm looking to buy a race bike, but I want the practicality of disc brakes. how long before they're expected to be UCI raced legal? Hashtag talkback.
There's a question.
I wish I knew the answer. I don't know the answer. I know some teams have them, but it's still all up in the air.
Yeah, they're
We
still
don't
experimenting
have an
with them in
definitive
early
answer.
2017, aren't they? But there's no kind of official resolution to it yet. Who knows when the date will be, yay or nay. Finally, Daniel Van Driel, after it heavily rains, my wheels fill with water. Is this normal? And is there an easy way to get the water out? It's not uncommon, particularly in the past. I remember having deep section aluminium rims which would fill up with water when it was raining. And there was actually a small little eyelet on one part of the rim. If you put that to the bottom, the water would come out. So maybe try and find one of those on your wheels.
Next up, we have this from Alpe 1567. Hopefully that's not his date of birth. You never know.
It is, if you read the
Indeed. Oh yeah, I'm a young rider, so it's definitely not his date of birth. Does shaving your legs and putting up with my friends telling me I look like a girl, is it worth it for marginal speed gains, or is it just a style thing? It is the age-old question, isn't it, shaving your legs? I mean, the pros, we all look up to, all shave their legs, apart from Peter Sagan in the early season, but your mates never let you live it down.
No, they don't. We've all been in this situation as male riders in the past, haven't we? When you're a teenager, not sure what to do. And unfortunately, the only person that can answer this question is you. At the end of the day, it's not going to make a huge difference to your cycling performance if you do shave your legs. However, if you do want to look like the vast majority of professional riders, there's only one thing to do, and that is to shave your legs. And probably your mates will joke and jibe with you for a couple of days, but after that, they're going to forget about it. Anyway, we do have a video on this very subject, as you might expect. Thankfully, I wasn't involved in it at all. And before we go full screen, I should just say, not safe for work.
Definitely not safe
or
for
school.
work. No. Now, if you've ever watched a bike race or even a group of cyclists out on the road or in a bike race, I bet you've wondered, why do they shave their legs? Well, here, rather than focusing on the why, we're going to focus on the how.
It is almost time for our final question of this week. Before we get to it, quick reminder that if you want to ask us a question ready for next week's show, just leave it in the comment section down below or on social media using the hashtag TalkBack. And this final question comes in from Ham3775. Which makes a bigger difference in how hard or easy a gear is, the amount of teeth in the rear or at the front?
That is a good question, Ham, and it's something that we all encounter and scratch our heads about, especially when you're first starting out. So to simplify it, the bigger the chainring or the bigger the amount of teeth on the front, the harder it is to pedal. And also the smaller the cogs at the back, the harder it is to pedal. So if you want to go up hills, you need to put it on the small chainring at the front and on the bigger cogs at the back. And then for descent, you want to have it on the big ring at the front with the most teeth and the smaller cogs at the back. And for flat riding, essentially you just want it on something that feels comfortable depending on how strong you are.
You do sometimes have it on the big ring for climbs though, don't you, Matt?
Sometimes.
Notice that. Compact is
Just
the
for
way
show.
to go, aren't they? You've probably guessed it though, we do have a video on this very subject coming up right now, how to choose your gear ratios. Right, let's start with the very basics. Your gear ratio effectively determines how far you travel forward for one complete revolution of the pedals. And what you really need to know is that the smaller the cog is on the rear cassettes here, the further you'll travel. And conversely, the larger the chainring at the front here, the further you'll move forward for that complete revolution.
Now, if you don't want to miss out on any future Global Cycling Network videos, click on the globe and you'll end up with a video in your inbox, or one or more every single day.
You will indeed.
It's absolutely free. Don't forget to tell your mates as well.
And before we even get there, I've actually got 2 more videos coming up for you right now. Down here is Ask the Pros, Wax or Shave over in the Tour of California. And on the other side is how to change gears like a pro.
Keep those questions coming. Hashtag TalkBack.